All right. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is June 1st. It is 6:06 p.m. I wanted to go ahead and get ready to call this meeting to order. First and foremost, we're going to take roll.
Thank you, Shay. Good evening, board members. This is Monica Negrilla, and we can start with a roll call. I'm gonna call your name, and please just state that you are here or present when you hear your name. Alyssa Stewart, actually, she got in touch with me tonight. She has a conflict. She's unable to attend, so she's excused. And next on my list here, it's Megan Richley.
Present.
Good to see you, Megan. Helen Kibench, I know she's on the phone. Helen, I'm gonna unmute you for a moment so you can.
Present.
Hi, welcome, good evening. And Helen is on the phone for the beginning of the meeting, but she will join via video in about a half an hour. And Lorna Gilmore is also excused tonight. She's traveling, she's unable to attend. Next on my list is Lucrecia Choto.
I'm in attendance.
Good evening, Lucrecia. Thank you. Ray, may I hear? Ray, I couldn't hear you. Oh, we lost. We could hear you earlier, but right now we cannot hear you.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Good evening and welcome. Shay?
I'm here.
Good evening. I don't see Tony yet with us. So I'm hoping he's gonna join a little bit later. Next is Christina Abonse.
I'm here. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome. Kelly Mann.
I'm here.
Good evening. Pretty Melody Pan.
Here.
Welcome. And Jacob Rubenstein.
I'm here.
Hi, Jacob. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. That concludes the roll call, Shay. And we have quorum.
Thank you so much, Monica. I appreciate that. To begin, we'll start by giving the statements about why we're doing this meeting virtually. Essentially, the state of Washington and the city of Issaquah continue to have a declared emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Under Chapter 115, laws of 2022, the city of Issaquah has determined that an in-person meeting cannot be held with reasonable safety due to these factors, and this meeting is being held remotely. Okay, so for our next item, we will actually I'm sorry, Monica, let me ask you this. Are we going to approve the previous minutes?
Good
Or
evening.
did we have any public comment?
Public comments first, if you don't mind. We did not have anyone signed up for public comments. I just want to note that we do have someone in the attendee section. We have Paul Wally from Right to Breathe. He joined the meeting to observe. When I checked in earlier, Paul noted that he would not like to make a comment at this point, but is just here to listen in. As a reminder for those of you who may or may not know, Paul Wally and the Right to Breathe Committee were instrumental in working with us in creating the equity board, so it's always nice to have Paul with us. Also in the attendee section, we have one of the human services staff, Kaylin Wood, and later in the meeting, I will invite her to introduce herself during staff report. And with that, I don't see anyone else in the attendance, and we did not have anyone signed up for public comment. So that concludes that section. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monica, for that. And thank you for all of our attendees joining us tonight. We would like to move forward with approving the minutes from May 4th, 2022. Has everyone had a chance to, or does anyone need an opportunity to review? No, if not, then we will move forward with the approval of the minutes. And I'm sorry, Monica, I don't recall the statement for a unanimous approval.
No worries at all, Shay. Thank you so much. So board members, at this time, if you would like, you can propose amendments if you see any edits that need to be made to the minutes. If you don't propose edits, then at this time, Shay, you would say with no amendments, and if if there are no objections to approve the minutes, then you would consider the minutes approved unanimously. And we might pause for a moment in case anyone has any edits or if anyone has concerns about approving the minutes. But I don't see none at this point, so I think you're okay with.
Kelly, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to check that it's the minutes said, I did not read through the minutes, my printer went out. But that I was present, I was late coming in. And so it may say it, I don't know.
I don't think it said you were late, but I do see that you were present.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, we do have you down as present. So
Thank you.
if there are no amendments or objections to the minutes, I'd like to propose that the minutes be unanimously approved. Alrighty, and with a unanimous approval, we will move on to our next agenda item. We are going to go over our equity assessment, and Monica is going to present that.
Thank you very much, Shay, and board members. With your permission, I have a brief presentation that I would like to share my screen. So give me just a moment. And can I get a confirmation that what you see on the screen is the PowerPoint slide?
Yes, it's just not in presentation mode.
Okay, I have it in presentation mode, so give me just a moment because I'm having on my end some technical difficulties.
Wonderful, we can see it now.
You can see it now,
Mhm.
and it's in presentation mode.
Yes.
Okay. So board members, we had talked a little bit last month as well, and in some previous months about creating an equity assessment. This is a task that Mayor Polly in charge the equity board with, and also ties really well, I believe, with creating a longer term work plan for our board. So I was hoping to give you a little bit of context tonight and a refresher as we are going to dive deeper in the upcoming months on that assessment. So I'm hoping to give you a little bit of a background and defining a little bit of the task, and then talk with you a little bit about the proposed process and timeline. So just going back to our roots, the equity board launched back in November of 2021, and we are an advisory board to the mayor, city council, and other city departments. We provide feedback, we develop recommendations. As you know, you already developed quite a few recommendations that went to city council successfully. And we also have a role in developing relationships with the community and advising the various departments in our city. I put a link in my presentation to the actual code that created our equity board in case anyone is interested in a refresher for that. And so with that, as we launched the board at the beginning of the year, Mayor Polly tasked the board with conducting an equity assessment and a gap analysis, and make recommendations for what should be the Issaquah specific priorities in terms of equity. Since our work is so broad, I think Mayor Polly is looking for us in making recommendations on where to start and what should be our priorities. In addition to that, we also had some other tasks assigned by administration and city council. As you remember, just last month, you worked with our equity consultant and the equity framework. And as you remember, we also worked on a cultural calendar. We also helped and made recommendations for a statement on the war on Ukraine, and so forth. We also have, as you're going to see tonight, sometimes we have other city departments who reach out to us and seek input. And you're going to hear a couple of presentations later tonight. And so with that, as our board continues to develop and as we have still, this is a very new board, and as we continue to work, to learn to work together, for 2022, our priorities were going to be to create a map, kind of like the resources and the existing initiatives that exist in terms of equity at the city internally and in the community, and work together in conducting that assessment. In addition to that, we would also work in parallel on those one-time action items that might come our way. But then we hope that with the work that we conduct on the assessment, we will help inform our long-term work plan for 2023 based on that assessment. And so with that, I'm going to pause just for a moment to give you the bigger picture on how a typical work plan process works at the city, no matter what division or department we are in. A typical board or commission would start with input received from the community. We tie any input received into the strategic planning that essentially gets tied into the city annual budget and work plan item. And in addition to that, combined with additional direction received by mayor and city council, ends up in creating the board work plan for the next year. So with that, and I apologize, I'm not sure why I don't see the chat, so I can pause for questions now, or I can finish my presentation and I can take questions and comments at that point. Shay, do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. I think we can pause and maybe digest and while you get your chat box pulled up. And then, of course, if anyone else has any questions or concerns, then we can raise them now.
Okay. Okay.
It looks like Lucretia has a comment. Would you mind coming off mute?
Thank you, Shay. So Monica, could you remind us what our fiscal calendar year looks like beginning and et cetera, so that we understand where we are now and any recommendations that we may have, how it'll apply to the budget? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great question, Lucrecia. So for the fiscal year, the city starts the year on January 1st. So it's a January 1st, December 31st fiscal year. And it's a great question because this is June and this is when we start preparations for the fiscal year. So we start with budget preparations now internally and at the community level. And Mayor Polly typically presents her budget to City Council in September. City Council goes through budget deliberations from September typically until November, with a hope of having by the end of November the budget approved for the next year. So then when the budget is approved, then that informs the work plan for the following year. So yeah, great question. And so that's why I think for us doing the mapping the resources and conducting the assessment now, we hope that that can inform in the fall, at least partially, some of that process by the end of the year. Great question. Other questions or comments?
Now, Monica, I did have a question. Do we expect that any of our recommendations will require budget?
Not necessarily. Great question. Not necessarily. And depending on where we are in our work, we may or may not, we may just partially complete the assessment. But yes, not necessary. Not all of our ask or tasks or recommendations will require a budget approval. Okay. So if I don't see other questions, then I'm going to move forward with the second piece and telling you a little bit about what the equity assessment, or what are some initial thoughts that we were having about how to approach the equity assessment. Am I still sharing my screen? Okay. Okay. And is it still in presentation mode?
No, it's now displaying the entire presentation.
Oh, okay. Let me see if this works. Looks like when I have in presentation mode, I cannot see the chat, but as long as you can see it well, then I'll move forward and I'll pause. Can you see it okay at this time?
We can all still see it, but again, it's not in presentation mode. Oh, well, now it is.
Okay, I think there might be a delay on my end, so I apologize for that. Okay, so in terms of how to go about the equity assessment, what we were hoping, and as we discussed, I believe in previous months with you all, was that we can start with a resource mapping. And what we mean by that is looking into what is the current landscape within each city department internally, right? So one piece, the internal piece, and then what is the current landscape in the community. And next, we would also love to work with the equity consultant to identify gaps and establish priorities for 2023 and beyond. Of course, as always, I did not put this, but all of this should be done with the community, right? We don't ever want to do things for the community. We always want to do it with the community. So I'm hoping that that goes without say. But in terms of mapping the resources, board members, I apologize for apologizing so many times, but my computer is not working tonight very well. So please let me know if the slides are not moving. For the resource mapping, we were, as I mentioned, we have two components: the internal part with city departments and externally in the community. For city departments, we were hoping to invite department leaders and department staff for each of our departments to come and introduce themselves, introduce the work that they are doing, and have a chance to collaboratively work with you on addressing equity related initiatives that they would like to present to you, but also give you an opportunity to learn what the city does, how the city does its work. So then that would also give you ideas and information on where you as a board may be able to provide input and feedback. And I'm going to tell you in just a moment here the proposed schedule that we have. So that's the internal piece. On the community side, we are hoping to invite different community groups here locally, but also regionally, who address equity locally at the community level, regionally, businesses, the school district, nonprofits, but also really equity community groups. And then with that, we were also hoping, of course, to pull in our equity consultant, who is doing a more in-depth assessment that includes interviews and surveys with city staff and additional landscape analysis. So for that, on our end, for discussions and next steps, I have a tentative schedule for city departments that I invited to come and introduce themselves to us. So you can learn their work. And that's what you see on the screen, the tentative dates for that. And then I also have tentative dates for when I would like to invite different community groups, depending on their availability. I am yet to reach out to the community groups and check their availability. But my hope is that between now and October, we will have September, October, we will have a chance to meet with as many community groups and as many departments at the city level as possible. And with that concludes my presentation, and I would like to just open it up for further questions and kind of like comments on what do you think about this as an initial approach. I think the last thing that I would like to mention that's not on the slide is that I'm hoping that you're going to have a chance to meet with everyone internally at the city and as many community groups as possible to hear from them between now and the fall. And in the fall, I'm hoping that we will connect then again with our equity consultant who you met last month. So then we can coordinate the work that they've been doing and see how we may support that body of work as well. So thoughts, concerns, reactions?
All right, it looks like, oh, okay, we have two. We have Lucretia who has some thoughts, and then Kelly also has a question.
I've spoken, so I'll let Kelly go first.
I think community mapping is always a good idea, but I wanted to make sure I understand to what end we were doing it. What were we going to have a write-up of what, who's doing what? Or are we looking at partnering? I just want to make sure I know.
That's a great question, Kelly. And yes, I think from everything that we learned in the end, we do want to have a write-up of kind of like what's our learning, right? What is everyone doing? So we have a good understanding of what are the resources that exist. And I think that I'm hoping that that will also help us identify where the gaps are. So then where we can come in and provide input, right? So yeah, I do envision a write-up at the end for sure. Lucrecia, I think you're next.
So do we currently have a place where community members can come to the city and say, hey, we're XYZ organization, here's what we do. We would like for you to be made aware of us. And if we don't have that place, is it an appropriate thing to have somewhere on the city page so that community groups that are out there can self-identify and or, like for example, if I'm aware of a group that I can fill out a form and make us all aware so that eventually there's a repository where community can report who they are and also a resource out back to the community so that people are aware of what's available.
Yes, great idea, Lucrecia. Absolutely. I think we would want to take a look at our webpage to see how inviting that is now, but I think we can be more intentional about, in addition to the webpage, to really reach out broadly and encourage and invite others to identify themselves in case we might not know everyone, right? And we might not. There might be groups that we are not aware. But definitely, I think also that can be, in addition to the webpage and what you suggested, which I really, really love your idea. I wonder if perhaps could be also one of the roles of the community engagement committee. And I know we are going to talk a little bit later about that, but I would love to hear thoughts on that and their role in reaching out intentionally to others and other groups that we might not be aware of. Right. So yes, thank you for that. Yes, let's look. I would love to follow up with you to see what else can we do on the website, at least webpage. Great suggestions. Thank you.
Monica, I think that's all we have for now.
Okay. Thank you, board members. So with that, that concludes my presentation tonight. And then moving forward, you will hear more and more guests in the upcoming month, which then I think that's a good segue into our next, because one of our presenters tonight is from our sustainability office. Shay, back to you and Stacy.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is going to be the Office of Sustainability. They're going to be doing an overview on a project they're working on and get our input. Stacy will actually be presenting tonight. Stacy, are you ready to join us?
Yes, thank you very much, Shay. Monica, are you still good doing the presentation, or if you're having any issues, let me know if you want me to pull it up.
Yeah, I am. Give me a moment, and you let me know if it doesn't work. Then I would be happy to give you the role. I'm not sure why today. I think my computer is just maybe slow.
No problem.
That's what I'm guessing.
Well, Monica's pulling that up. I'll just do a quick introduction. So thank you so much for making time tonight. I really wanted to get on your June agenda because I am hoping to come back to you all later this summer or in September to talk to you in more depth about one of our projects. So really appreciate the time tonight. So my name is Stacy Van McKinstry. I'm the Sustainability Manager with the City of Issaquah in our Office of Sustainability, which is the Office of One right now. I started just back in December, so I am still getting up to speed on city practices and the work of this office, but we'll talk to you tonight about some of the items that we have underway. And we are also battling colds at our house, so hoping my voice makes it through the presentation. Monica, it looks like it's in presentation mode with the notes. So I don't know if you're able to switch maybe your screen.
Stacy, on my end, it shows regular presentation mode, and that's where I'm puzzled about my challenge tonight. Would it be more helpful if I just give you the presenter role?
Sure, I could try that. Yeah.
I apologize.
No problem.
Okay, give me just a moment.
I have it in PDF, so hopefully I can show that version with no issues.
Okay, and you are now presenter.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. All right. Monica, are you seeing the PDF version of the presentation?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, great. All right, so tonight I'm going to go through 4 topics pretty briefly. I know you all have a packed agenda. I'll give you a quick overview of our office, overview of the climate action plan, and then as Monica mentioned, I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper on 2 projects that are underway because we would love to get some feedback from the Equity Board tonight. As I mentioned, this won't be the first time we come to you. We are planning to be back in September to dig in deeper into our climate vulnerability assessment. So the Office of Sustainability is currently, as I mentioned, a single staff person. I do have a part-time intern, Billy Almanza, who is working with me and will be working full-time this summer, which I'm very excited about. We sit within the executive office and we report to our city administrator. As you know, our city really prides itself in our surrounding natural environment and has a strong commitment to environmental stewardship. Our office develops and implements projects, programs, and policies within the city and the community in order to advance sustainability and environmental stewardship in Issaquah. And we're really working to achieve the community's interrelated goals of environmental, economic, and social sustainability. We previously, within the Office of Sustainability, housed the Human Services Program, waste management. We had an extensive green building program, environmental education, a whole range of other initiatives. But our office has shifted, and now we are really focused on implementing our climate action plan. I also staff the environmental board, which is a fairly new board for the city as well. This is a photo of one of our consultants working at a recent eco market in the Highlands, where she was teaching folks about alternatives to hazardous cleaning and yard products. She'll be at a number of additional events around the city this summer. Our climate action plan, as I mentioned, is really the primary focus in the Office of Sustainability. Some of you may have participated in the development of the plan. It recognizes that our climate is changing and that we need to act quickly in order to prevent further impact to our planet and be prepared for the changes that are already underway. Our plan sets really bold and ambitious targets for reducing emissions that cause climate change. We've also aligned our targets with those of many of our regional partners. We work across multiple cities and counties to achieve those targets collectively. Based on input from the community, the Climate Action Plan addresses both the causes of climate change as well as identifies the actions that we need to take that are already underway, as I mentioned, as well as there's a number of actions that address both of those. So examples of mitigation actions, those that would reduce further emissions into the atmosphere, include things like investing in clean energy, moving off fossil fuels, improving opportunities for transportation that are not based on cars, and waste reduction. Examples of adaptation include items such as preparing for disasters, building resiliency and redundancy in our systems, creating more green spaces. And then examples of those actions that meet both mitigation and adaptation needs are things such as water and energy conservation and making sure our buildings are as efficient as possible. Our climate action plan for this city was developed on a very fast timeline, one of the fastest ones that I'm aware of for nearby cities. It was done in about 9 months, but it did involve many touch points with the community. My predecessor worked on this plan, and coming into the position, I was just very impressed on how much community involvement there was given the fast timeline for its development, as well as it occurring during COVID. Throughout the entire process, we engaged with community members through meetings, workshops. There was a survey across the entire community that got a pretty good response rate. We had targeted focus groups, such as with the business community and on other topics. And there were other opportunities to engage through our boards and council as well. The goal of this engagement process was really to ensure that we developed a plan that fit Issaquah specifically, that aligned with our community's priorities, and that also had the best chance of being supported by residents. Since the adoption of the Climate Action Plan back in December, we have been working on implementing it. As I mentioned, we have very bold targets. It's really going to take the entire community working together to reach those targets. These include things such as changing behavior of individuals, getting our building owners to commit to energy efficiency, and really standing up the city as a leader in terms of our own practices and policies. Looking across all of our actions, we identified those to implement this year that we thought we could get done quickly without a lot of preparation, but that would also have meaningful and long-lasting impact. We also looked at some of the actions that were slated for longer term implementation to see what work we could start doing now to begin to prepare for those actions, such as if we were looking at a potential policy change in the future, could we start incentives, outreach programs this year in order to prepare for those? As we did in the development of the plan, we're really trying to focus on equity through implementation of the Climate Action Plan. This means making sure we have an equity lens in terms of access to the programs, the benefits the programs are providing, the emissions reductions and where those are being achieved, and also making sure the community has input on implementation. We have a lot of projects underway this year, and I welcome more opportunities to share with you all and seek feedback on the work that's being implemented. In just a moment, I do want to dig into 2 of those projects we're working on and get your input. But before doing that, I thought I would pause and see if there are any questions overall on what the work sustainability is doing or on the climate action plan.
Stacy, it looks like we don't have any. Oh, wait, I think Kelly has a question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Kelly, would you come off mute, please?
Kelly, I apologize for interrupting you. I don't think we can hear you.
I would like to hear, I'm sure you guys have done it, so you can keep it really brief, but I'd love to hear the equity analysis around the work that you've done so far. I mean, I know you've reached out to people, but I'd like to hear who and what kind of framing you were using around equity.
Yeah, that is a great question. Though that is actually part of what I'd like to talk to you all about next on the 2 major programs we're working to implement and get feedback on whether our approach is appropriate or are there shifts we should make to our approach. So if we can hold off, that's where I'd really like your input tonight. Other questions?
I don't think we have any more.
Okay, great. All right, so let's launch into those 2 programs where I really do want to hear your feedback on whether our approach so far seems on track. Are there shifts we should make, other things we should be considering? So the first program is our Energy Smart Eastside Heat Pump Campaign. So Issaquah, along with the nonprofit organization Spark Northwest, as well as 4 other Eastside cities, is working to launch a heat pump campaign. Heat pumps run on electric power. It allows us to transition off fossil fuels such as natural gas or oil as a heating source. They are also great for cooling, so they're a great replacement and much more energy efficient replacement for air conditioning. They run in both cold and hot temperatures. And overall provide a much more comfortable home. Our program is looking to simplify the process for those that are interested in transitioning to a heat pump. We're going to be running 2 components of this program. One is a market rate program for standalone detached homes with incentives that will be available from Puget Sound Energy. At this time, there's likely not going to be additional discounts unless our manufacturer is able to provide those. The other component of this program is one for low-income residents. We are going to be putting in a request for funding from council to cover installations in low-income multifamily housing, likely at the 80% or below AMI. We have been talking with Imagine Housing as an affordable housing provider that works across the 5 participating cities in this program. And then we've also been in contact with HopeLink as they have direct connections to individuals in both multifamily as well as detached housing, and they can put us in contact with eligible, interested residents. So here's where I'm really interested in hearing from you all, and both in terms of how can we best reach out to our community in terms of this program, as well as our approach for the low income component of the program. As I mentioned, we are planning to run a market rate program. Again, this will have it pretty much at cost if someone was to go out independently and do a heat pump install, but we're cutting down the process and making it more streamlined for them to go through that process to do install. For getting information out on the program, we really want to make sure we are reaching our whole community. We are planning to do some translation of materials. We're going to be doing communication through the city's normal communication channels, tabling at summer events. There will be workshops for interested participants to attend, and through that we will connect them directly with the installers. As I mentioned, for the low income component of the program, we are planning to work with Imagine Housing because they are represented across the 5 cities that are partnering this program, but also with HopeLink so that they can identify individuals that we might be interested in working with. So that is our planned approach. I would really like to hear from you all on, are there ways that we could be better about making sure we're getting information out to the community? Should we be thinking differently about our low income component of this program, or any other considerations that you all have as we move into implementing this program?
I had a question. I was gonna ask, so if I understand correctly, this will be available only to single family homes. Is that correct?
Well, yes, because there is work that there is an installation that happens, either a ductless system where there's a head installed in a room of a house, or through the existing duct work. So we will be really targeting single family for the market rate program. For the low income component of this program, we are planning to work primarily with multifamily because we think we can get the most work done there. And a lot of our cities, as I understand it, a lot of our low income and likely most vulnerable populations do live in multifamily, but we are interested in possibly working with HopeLink to identify either some fixed income seniors that are living in single family that we might want to work with as well. And I'd say that's for this initial year. In future years, we are hoping to expand this program and work with multifamily housing providers beyond just the affordable housing providers. But for this initial year, for our equity component, we were planning to work with low-income multifamily. Did that answer your question, or too much information? Or?
No, that was
Okay.
perfect. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Yeah.
And it looks like Preeti has a question, and then Ray also has a question.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Stacy. My question, and maybe there'll be a comment to follow, is wanting to know, you noted that you would be using the normal communications channels that the city uses. I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more, because I think that there could be opportunities with like ethnic media and other outlets, depending on what the city already uses.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So typically, I think we're hoping to reach beyond our regular sustainability listserv, but sending out information via our weekly Issaquah Insider, possibly through the mayor's report. We have a number of listservs that go to communities. Trying to think of the other ones. We do channels through social media. Our communications manager usually works through as well. But then also planning to do a lot of that in-person kind of one-on-one conversations with folks at farmers market, at concerts on the green, the art walks, other events that we can get to this summer. But yeah, I welcome if there's other ideas, either through social media, materials that go out, or even events that we can hand out flyers and talk with folks. Would love to hear those ideas.
Yeah, and just one quick follow-up. In terms of translations, is there like a list of most spoken languages in Issaquah that you would be looking to in terms of the number of languages for translation?
Yes. I believe Monica or someone provided that to me early on. And then looking across the 3 cities, right now we were looking at Spanish, Chinese, and possibly Japanese because of our work in Mercer Island as well. I'll need to see if we have, I would hope we'd have capacity to go beyond that. So if there are other recommended ones, I know that there's more on the list that have been provided as kind of the next tier for translation, but yeah, welcome feedback on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Ray, if you're ready, you can come off mute.
Yeah, hi, Stacy. May I ask you to jump back a few slides if you are able
Sure.
to on that one that says ICAP development process?
Yes.
A couple questions. Oh, I think you passed it. That one right there. Thank you. You had said the sustainability team is fairly new. Maybe this is more of a question for Monica, but has this workflow, this plan been initiated or followed with other committees, the Issaquah, City of Issaquah, that involve community engagement to sustainability? Or is this something that's being initiated by the sustainability team?
Ray, from my perspective, this is Monica. This is similar with other initiatives that the city's been doing in developing different plans. For example, we, on our end, our team completed earlier this year the Human Services Strategic Plan, and it is a little bit different on our end. We started with actually some non-profit focus groups and interviews and community group interviews, but pretty
Okay.
much we touched on all of the other ones, like boards and commissions and staff and all of that. So yes.
Wonderful. I don't know if a light bulb is going on in your head, but it is in mine, Monica. The subcommittee that we created for equity and community engagement can very well follow this plan, right? So if this is something that can happen in parallel or together, where we create a workshop and initiate a public survey and create focus groups, very, very similar. So I greatly appreciate this slide, because if there is a initiative that's happening before what we're trying to expand with community engagement, we can learn from one another. That was my comment. So thank you, Stacy. And I look forward to staying connected with you on how this progresses.
Great. Thanks, Ray. All right. And I was just going to check with, I believe it was Kelly too, that asked the question earlier that I deferred. This is just one of the projects that I wanted to jump into, but wanted to see if hearing a little bit more about what we're currently considering for equity, if I was helping to answer your question or anything else I can follow up on that.
I think my question's to Monica also, and that is the framework that we have given the city council now going to start being implemented by the organizations? And is this one that could be done? And when people come to us, they've already done the framework, so we can see what they're thinking.
Such a great question, Kelly. Yes, absolutely. So I think that would be the next step, actually. So the framework that you worked on and recommended last month is going to go and be presented to City Council later this month. And so if City Council approves it, right, they need to approve it, it becomes a policy. So then that becomes a policy of the city that will be implemented at each of the departments. So you're absolutely right. And hopefully, in the next few months, each of the departments, when they work on an initiative, they will have to go through that equity framework through those questions prior to bringing an item to you or to City Council. So that's exactly the intent. It's not quite there. So I think Stacy in her work, she's been doing already this work. I know that Stacy and I, we worked together. She consulted with us. But that's why Stacy's coming to you with, okay, this is what we've been thinking. We don't have at this time yet an equity framework to use, but this is what we've used. And what do you think, board members? Such a great question. Great, Kelly. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, that will be exciting to have because yes, the work we're presenting tonight is really based on a couple of conversations with Monica and her team. So having a framework to walk through and really think about this more comprehensively will be much appreciated. I have one other project I wanted to present on that it can be
Stacey,
quick.
before
I
you
just
go
wanted to
on.
check Monica, make sure we're okay time-wise.
Yes, but I know Shay wanted to say, I think we have another comment from Lucrecia. Is that what
Okay.
you meant to say?
Yes,
Shay?
that's yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Stacy, since you asked for feedback with regards to how to do outreach, I would like for your department and the city of Issaquah in general to consider having a button at the top of your page, which translates the page to whatever language the visitor needs the page to be in. I feel like I've visited quite a few pages in other areas where they use that function. And I can tell you that it's pretty accurate. It minimally gets the essence of the information that people need. And I think that it's just a good practice to have access to information where people who are reaching out to you can actually access you. And it's just an idea. Thank you.
Yeah. Great suggestion. Yeah, Monica, go ahead.
If I may, I would like to respond to that. Great suggestion, Lucrecia. And actually, we have that capability. The only difference is that it is now found at the bottom of the page. There's a button that says select language. And so you can translate in many languages each of the city web pages. It's at the bottom of each of the pages. So if you go on everywhere in the city of Issaquah, you should be able to find it. But a great suggestion to perhaps make a recommendation to try to put it at the top of the page.
Yeah, I was going to actually say if you did a UX design sort of analysis of like where people navigate, the bottom of the page is probably not the best place to have that.
Thank you. We'll definitely make that a suggestion to our communications team. Thank you so much.
And I think that's all we have as far as questions and comments go. Stacy, if you'd like to proceed.
Great, thank you. I'll try and move through this quickly. And this is one item that we're seeking early input on. This is one I do hope to come back to you or plan to come back to you early in the fall, late summer to dig in a little bit deeper and get some more specific input. So in our 2021 climate action plan, we provided a very high level overview of the anticipated climate impacts in Issaquah, what we expect to see locally, such as rising temperatures, increased risks of wildfire, reduced snowpack, and changes in precipitation leading to drier summers and wetter winters. One of the early actions in the climate action plan was to complete a more in-depth vulnerability assessment. We have recently contracted with Cascadia Consulting Group to support this work and are just beginning to initiate this project. As part of the climate vulnerability assessment, we are planning to cover the following items: do a deeper dive into anticipated climate impacts, such as what are the resulting impacts from changing precipitation, river and stormwater flooding, what are the resulting impacts from hotter temperatures, etc. We are then planning to look at where are our most vulnerable areas within the community, where are our most vulnerable populations within the community, and then develop actionable actions, things that we can actually put into policies or communication materials that we can take out to the community that come in different formats, different languages, that are really accessible to the communities that are going to be most impacted from climate change. We were originally planning on 2 community engagement events to hear from the community about their concerns, actions we should be taking. But after talking with Monica's team, we're thinking of maybe shifting that to 4 to 5 more focused outreach opportunities where we would meet people where they're at instead of them coming to a big workshop that we're hosting. So example, going to the senior center and having a meeting there, going to the Hutchison House, other opportunities where we can really go to our community and hear from them instead of asking them to come to us. We're still shaping this idea. We're also seeking some funding so that we can further expand on the community engagement, as well as on the number of communication materials that we're able to develop out of this project. So I know we're running a little bit short on time, but I wanted to put these questions to your board, and welcome to take feedback after this meeting too. But wanted to hear from you a bit on what does success of a climate vulnerability assessment for Issaquah look like, and how can we really best reach the members of our community that maybe aren't the typical ones showing up to our climate events, but are really the ones that might be impacted by changes that we are seeing and will see. So a few ideas from our staff, very initial staff brainstorming session are up here, but really wanted to hear from you if you have other ideas of what would make this project successful and how can we really reach our community and involve them in this project. So I'll pause there for any initial feedback that folks have now.
All right, and Ray, I saw you first. If you're ready, you can come off mute.
Well, the first two that I thought of when I thought of that second item there are two high school students on this committee. Those who are most interested in climate change and discussions, I would suspect is happening at that level in high school. So I encourage, if there's opportunity, Megan and Jacob, to, if this is happening at the high school, how we can make that connection with the work going on here and the work we're doing as a board as a whole.
Great, thank you.
And I see Preeti has a comment.
Yeah, when I'm thinking about the community groups noted here, in some of the limited community engagement I've done, it seems like trusted messengers, and I like the idea, and I think like leveraging community organizations that have a strong membership in who's likely to be the most impacted and the most vulnerable. I think you probably have a decent sense of who that is ahead of, any official or formal assessment, but kind of leveraging the community groups that exist for like language access, thinking about sometimes the faith-based organizations might be the best route to with trusted messengers to get into the communities. So I would kind of recommend that approach. I think that might end up being one of the more effective paths for you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, maybe we could think of kind of a training opportunity for those community groups for them to have the conversations or something. Oh, thank you.
And then Stacy, I wanted to ask, and don't feel like you're on the spot here. Have you all discovered any drawbacks to this particular product being installed or these things being presented to the community?
Through the climate vulnerability assessment. Yeah, I guess if you have ideas of what you're thinking in terms of drawbacks, just increasing concern or fear, could you share a little bit more, and then maybe I'll be able to answer better what you're thinking.
Sure, sure.
Thanks.
So for example, I know when it comes to climate for me, I'm thinking about the timeline on the effects of what my changes actually have. Are we actually slowing the process down? Do we eliminate any of the toxins that we often put back into the environment? Have you all, at least, well, I'm sure you all have that information available, but is there somewhere where you can actually go to review that?
Yeah, great question. So one campaign I didn't talk about tonight is our Climate Action Challenge, which is helping provide individuals the resources they need to make changes in their daily life to reduce their impact. And there's a lot of information in there about what influence those, or the amount of impact those different actions take. I think for the so not quite, I don't know if that quite answered your question. I could dig in further if there's interest. I think for the climate vulnerability assessment, what we're really trying to work with the community on is saying, no matter what we do today, we still know that we are going to face some impacts. We're already seeing impacts because of the emissions that have already been generated in the past. So let's make sure our community is as resilient as possible and that our entire community is resilient as possible, because we know that those impacts are going to affect members of our community that don't have necessarily access to resources, or maybe that live in certain parts of our community, and often are the ones that are most impacted during other major events. So the climate vulnerability assessment is really an opportunity to educate the community and give them the resources that they need to increase their own resiliency as well as our community's resiliency. So a little bit of a different focus versus kind of the mitigation approach and reducing our emissions, but that is an area that we're working on and building out our website to show the impacts of those different actions, as well as launching the Climate Action Challenge campaign. But happy to talk more about that as well if there's interest.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacey. I appreciate you answering that question for me. And then I see we have Lucretia and Jacob who also have comments.
I will let Jacob go since I've spoken.
Thank you. Kind of going off what Ray said earlier, I just know, at least in my experience in my high school, I feel like energy usage and like climate change are the two issues which I feel like the most high schoolers are passionate about. And like we have like stats projects we do where we go around the school asking people questions, and through like my project and various friends' projects, like that was definitely backed up. And I feel like the second question here on this slide about how we can like best reach people, like I think like high schoolers would definitely be interested, and not just high schoolers, but like any youth. Like in my experience, that's the issue that like I felt other high schoolers are most passionate about as a whole.
That's excellent. Yeah, I know our intern is really eager to work on a youth engagement component for the vulnerability assessment. So we might follow up with you and try and flesh out that idea and get some more thoughts around how we might best implement that. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, and Lucretia, were you ready to go?
Sure.
Because I also saw that Megan had a
Oh,
comment.
I'll let Megan go.
And I guess to kind of go off of what Jacob was saying and kind of building off of what Ray was kind of asking as far as community engagement, Issaquah High School is very similar in that regard, as a lot of students take a lot of there's a lot of passion around climate change and being eco-efficient. And I feel like another way that would be a really good reach out for you, Stacey, is to actually reach out to individual clubs within the schools, because that's where students are collaborating ideas on what they think would be a good idea. And also, continuing to promote that as well by engaging with them. And I think a lot of students would be super interested in that.
Great, thank you. Great suggestion.
Okay, so Stacey, I was hoping that you could tell us in the language that you're using in the slide here, how to best reach those that are typically not involved. I would like to know who is typically involved so that we have kind of an idea of like who's already engaged, and maybe we can then be of better help to you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I could have phrased that a little bit better. I guess as we were talking with our consultants, when we hold climate conversations or environmental events, we tend to see a lot of the same folks showing up at those that are members of some of the local nonprofits, such as People for Climate Action. We have a few youth groups such as the sustainability ambassadors that are really involved. So I think we're hoping to reach those that maybe right now don't see a connection between climate and their life or a personal connection to it, where we can bring them into the conversation and make sure, ultimately, we really want to make sure that the communication materials that are coming out of this project are reaching the right people in the right way, those that are going to be most impacted by any climate impacts in this community. So yeah, I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase that, but it's a lot of the folks that are typically showing up to our events, mostly, as I mentioned, through those groups such as People for Climate Action, and those that might not see that direct personal connection to climate in their lives. So not a great answer there. Trying to think of a better way to describe that, but kind of beyond our kind of usual suspects that are showing up and really involved.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stacey, I think that's all we have. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Monica
go ahead.
has a question.
Thank you, Shay. And board members, this is, I think, a broader question to all of you board members as it is to Stacey, because what I really like, Stacey, again, thank you so much for coming here tonight. What I like about the plan is that intentionally you are creating projects that address those who are the most vulnerable in our community. But also, this made me think with even just the previous questions and comments. As I was reminded recently about, how we created the equity board, and as we define, how do we define those who are the most vulnerable, and we talk about different languages, I do wonder if we should always remind ourselves and whether we should always also lead with racial equity, because within the most vulnerable groups in our community, I think it's always good to remind ourselves that those that are Black or African Americans in particular, that are even more marginalized or more impacted than what we call those who are just low income. So would always wonder if we can reflect within the groups that are the most impacted, within the groups that are low income, if we should always lead with that racial equity. And intentionally, as we consider outreach, to also intentionally do outreach and conduct outreach to those community groups as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Monica. Okay, well, thank you so much for the time tonight. I'm looking forward to taking the feedback we received, incorporating that into our work. If you have additional feedback after this meeting, feel free to send it to me or to Monica. Happy to also talk with folks one-on-one. We are planning to be back, dig in a little bit deeper on some of the initial work under the climate vulnerability assessment and seek your feedback. And just going forward, I'll work with Monica to see when and where we might be able to bring our other initiatives to this board and get your feedback. So really look forward to continuing to work with you all. So please do reach out, and this is our intern's contact. He'll be working quite a bit on the vulnerability assessment this summer, and we are happy to meet with you all and be back anytime. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacey. That was such a great presentation. Monica, I did want to ask if it was possible for you to share this deck with us so that some of us could take it in a little bit more, and we could actually definitely reach out to Stacey and give some of our feedback.
Thank you, Shay. And that's a great segue into a reminder that, yes, all of the presentations are in the agenda packet on the webpage in the link that you received. So you have that, and I'm happy to follow up if needed, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it looks like Kelly has a comment.
So Monica, thank you so much for reminding us about racial equity. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm trying to sort out something right now, and so this is a kind of a pondering out loud, and that is, it appears to me as the organization, the city, is going through equity, right? That there is this really fantastic understanding to ask people who are living racial inequities, right? And so, and that they work in somewhat apart from each other. Is that a correct assumption? Or are they always going through you? How do you, let me step back. Has the city thought about having, and we're different because we do policy too. So is the city thinking about having what Preeti was talking about, which is key communicators in different communities being updated and talked to about what's going on in the city in a way that works for them? Is that part of the plan?
And so that's Kelly, that's a great question. I think the city is a very interesting place where is interested and wants to address equity and more internally in the community.
Yes.
And I don't think that's exactly why we need to do an assessment. We don't have a clear plan of like, okay, this is what we are going to do. I think we started with small projects here and opportunities in different areas, but that's exactly why we need a more strategic plan on how and what, right? Which communicating that, what you suggested and Preeti suggested, I think that can be one of the ways in which we work, and there have to be multiple. I don't think that we have a clear initial plan. There's intent and genuine interest from the city, from different departments, but there's no yet a very cohesive plan that's implemented. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We are, I think, in very beginning initial stages of that.
Yeah.
As you can see, that's why I think different, like all of the departments individually are trying, but I think everybody's saying, where do we start? How do we do this well? And all of that. So we are in that interesting stage. Yeah. So.
Thank you so much. Did we have anyone else that had questions or possibly comments? Such a great presentation. Then we will move on to our next agenda item. It looks like we have the 2022 ADA self-evaluate. Oh, I'm sorry. I think Stacey already went over that. I'm just kidding. We have our committee report.
So you are right. It is the next one is the ADA.
Oh, okay. It's the ADA self-evaluation and transition plan project. I'm sorry. I thought I skipped a section there.
You're right on.
No. And that will be presented by John. And it looks like Jennifer. Are you all ready to present?
We are. Thank you very much.
Thank
I'm John
you.
Mortensen, the Transportation Engineering Manager with the City of Issaquah. Really excited to be talking about this project that we're working on. In the transportation group, we really focus around the mobility part of the strategic plan, which says getting around town is easier for people who live, work, and play here. And for people with disabilities, there are a lot of barriers that are excluding and make it so people cannot get around town. And this project that we're working on is beyond just the transportation system. It looks at parks and facilities, but it's a really exciting project. When the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law 32 years ago, President Bush at the time said, "Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." And I like to think of it not as one shameful wall, because 32 years would be a long time to still have a wall up and to need a transition plan, but many walls that need to come down. This transition plan is a plan for the city to remove these barriers for people with disabilities. And to update this, we did a transition plan back in about 2014, and this year we're working to update it. And so we hired Transportation Solutions, and Jennifer's the project manager with Transportation Solutions, and she's going to talk to you about the project. Jennifer.
Hi, Equity Board. Thank you for your time this evening. Monica, shall I share my screen?
Let me try, and then you'll tell me if it doesn't work. Well, I'm gonna try to steal the idea from Stacy to see if sharing the PDF version might be more helpful. Can you see it, and does it look okay?
Yes.
Perfect then.
And if you want full screen, you can go to View and Full Screen.
Did that work?
When you have your File, Edit, View options, yep, if you want to go to View. If you move up next to File, you have to go to View there, yep, and then Full Screen Mode. That should make it a little bigger for everyone.
Thank you. I feel like I'm learning so much tonight.
Sure. So tonight I'll be providing an informational update about what the self-evaluation and transition plan is and why it's needed, as well as the project scope and how we're moving through a schedule that's roughly a year for this project. And then I'll be discussing the ADA advisory group that we're trying to form at this early stage in the project, and our next steps with some time for questions. Next slide, yep. An ADA transition plan is a document that shows how an agency moves towards compliance to remove barriers for people with disabilities. And the plan needs to have 4 pieces. It needs to identify physical and communicative barriers that limit accessibility, and that is in the city's programs, services, and activities. So the public right-of-way, its buildings, parks and trails, and the programs that the city offers. The plan also needs to describe the methods to make all of these city facilities and et cetera accessible. It also needs to provide a schedule so that the planning component to implement this plan. And also the plan needs to identify who is responsible from the city to implement the plan. Next slide, please. As John mentioned, the Americans with Disabilities Act is what created the federal mandate for an ADA transition plan. And the plan needs to have self-evaluation piece as well as an implementation piece. Within the existing facilities that need to be looked at, there is some specific requirements for pedestrian access through curb ramps and walkways serving state and local government offices and facilities, transportation, public accommodation, and employers. And so we are looking at places likely accessed by members of the ADA community for services. And then also a plan is needed to maintain grant eligibility from the Washington State Department of Transportation. Next slide. This plan that the city is embarking on is quite comprehensive. It is looking at different types of public right-of-way facilities. You can see listed curb ramps, sidewalks, accessible pedestrian signals, and accessible on-street parking. I am working to use the 2014 data the city has already worked to gather, as well as establish methods for collecting new data as new curb ramps and improved curb ramps and other facilities are built in the city. We also are evaluating building facilities, parks, and shared use trails. These are paved trails identified by the Issaquah Parks Department. And we are using 2014 evaluations that are still valid, updating some of those, and adding some new facility evaluations to have as big an assessment of existing facilities as possible. The other, back one slide. Yes. There are also some administrative roles and policies and procedures. The city already has an ADA coordinator, a grievance procedure, and the public notice saying that the city will not discriminate based on disability. We also will help the city develop an accessible pedestrian signal policy for deciding when new accessible pedestrian signals are built and how to address requests from the public. And we also will designate who's responsible to implement the plan. Next slide, please. This spring, we have worked to identify how much of the 2014 data is useful and what new evaluations are needed. And as we move into the summer and fall, we will be assessing, prioritizing, and developing a barrier removal schedule and plan to remove barriers across all of the listed areas. In November, in the late fall, early winter, we'll provide a draft plan to be reviewed by the public, by the city committees or councils who desire to see it. Council will see it, and the ADA advisory group we're forming, with expected adoption in February of next year. Next slide, please. Stakeholder engagement is very important in the ADA transition plan process, and the city is going above and beyond the federal requirement for engagement. The only requirement is that the draft plan be made available for public comment, but we are also seeking out, we're going to do online surveys for the community to submit barriers they experience, and possibly also to share their preferences for priorities of removing barriers. And then also an ADA advisory group that we want to be involved from the beginning of this project through its completion. We'd like that group to be comprised of members of the local ADA community who best know the barriers in Issaquah. We also have a few transportation advisory board members, at least one that has expressed their intent to participate on this advisory group. And it's also one of our intentions tonight is to see if anyone from this group is interested in participating, or who may know people who could provide insight for this project. The draft plan will be viewed by City Council, and it will be open for the public to comment on as well. And that will be in probably December, early January. Next slide, please. The ADA advisory group will start out as a limited commitment of attending 3 to 5 virtual meetings so that we can make it convenient for people. Presentation materials will be provided in advance as well. This group, we hope that it can advise our project team on making sure we have found the barriers that exist, and we're not overlooking barriers that people in our community experience. This group will also help refine how we prioritize barrier removal, and the group can recommend improvements to make our programs, services, and facilities more accessible. And most importantly, this group can promote this project through relationships with other local organizations that provide services to members of our community with disabilities. Next slide, please. So time for questions. Maybe we'll go back one slide so you can see that list of advisory group activities. Our main intent is to make this process inclusive of the people that have the most expertise and will be impacted the most by the ADA transition plan to remove barriers. John, do you have anything else you'd want to add?
No, I don't. Thank you.
So if this group has any questions, welcome to take them about the project and our goal to be inclusive in providing removal of barriers to the city of Issaquah.
And it looks like Lucretia has a comment.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very informative, especially for those of us who may not be familiar with your office. As with any of the different departments that come to us, I guess it's the same sort of questions that you saw us pose earlier to Stacy, Jennifer, with regards to, are you taking into consideration different cultures? How are you reaching communities that have language barriers, etc.? Are those things that you as a department are already working on?
I'll take that question. It's a really good question. And while you guys were asking Stacy questions during her presentation, it really got me thinking about how can we include equity. And in addition to just, I think, for one, reaching out to people with disabilities is reaching out to an important group but then how do we also incorporate equity into how we reach out? And we're very early on in the process and haven't worked out the details. How do you do that? I know that I heard you guys talking about an equity framework that's going to council. I'd be curious about, but ways where we can incorporate equity into that ADA advisory group to make sure that it is a very representative group for the community is something that I think would be important. I don't have answers for how to go about doing it, but I think it's something that I would like for us to do. And I guess I would pose the question if anyone has any good ways to incorporate equity into our outreach to form this ADA advisory group. We'd love to hear that.
One idea that comes to mind for me is that it's just a starting point, and obviously we can branch off from there. But if I recall correctly, the state provides a 0 to 3 outreach to make sure, like, kids are either physically delayed or developmentally delayed in some way. And they do a really good job of having those services in multiple languages, at least in Southern Washington they do. I don't know how it is here because my kids used those services when they were very little, and that's where I lived at the time. But I'm thinking of some place like that that is already doing this sort of outreach to the various communities in the various languages. I would say I would encourage you to start there because they're already doing that sort of work, and you kind of can piggyback in their outreach efforts to make your department and what is happening here in Issaquah known. Is one avenue that I would venture to say would be a good start. And also our K through 12 system, right? Because that's typically where we see people who have 504s or IEPs or any other sort of accommodation for their kids. And then by default, you have access to the various communities that you may not be aware of otherwise. Those are my recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. Great ideas.
right, does anyone else have any questions or comments? All right, thank you, Preeti. She has the comment for us.
Yeah, this it's not I worry that it's not going to be a very constructive comment, but I feel like, what in terms of the project schedule and the plan, it feels like, the right steps are listed out, but I think it's really when you start digging into the details around how are you recruiting folks for this advisory group and how you're finding out those barriers. I think it's in the details when you can really dig in and respond. I think in a more meaningful way. So I feel like I'm kind of stuck in this like not having enough detail to react to. So I think I think the great first step, in which you have teed up, is like a really diverse. I would suggest intersectional advisory group. So folks at the intersection of living with disabilities, of a maybe a wide range of. We know that group is very, very diverse and in range of abilities, and also thinking about, yeah, like the intersection with language, with race, and just making sure those different groups are represented. And then I would also say, for folks who've been very limited and restricted, in their access to different parts of the physical environment. I'm thinking about other transportation related things where there's like a rider and non-rider survey, thinking about who hasn't had access for so long and how do you reach out to folks like that so they can start, figuring out how to give them some access. So yeah, just casting a wide net in terms of representation of the group.
Thank you.
I don't see any other comments or questions. So I would like to say it's safe to say that you all gave a great presentation and gave us a lot of information that we're digesting, and we will likely reach out once we have more information to share.
Thank you for
All
your
right, well,
time tonight.
yeah, thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, and Monica, did you have any feedback for us?
No, I apologize. I was just waving goodbye to our guests.
Thank you. Yes, really good presentations tonight. Um, alrighty, if we are ready, we will move forward to our community engagement committee report out, and that is going to be presented by Ray. Ray, are you ready?
I am, yeah. Looking forward to sharing this. Monica, did you want to bring up the slide deck again?
Sure.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
As she tees this up, I think just listening in to the other presenters that preceded me gave me at least great insight to perhaps a better trajectory for the community engagement committee. Certainly hearing the board work plan, Monica, that you presented with the concentric circles and how we kind of build upon a community plan, and then listening to Stacy and her ICAP development process. This really does require a lot of engagement, not only across our board, but within the community. So just to step back a bit, remember how this was created. At our April 6th meeting, the Equity Board voted to form a subcommittee focused on increasing community engagement. Keep that at the forefront, community engagement around equity. And then at that time, we took a poll of our members to see who would be interested in joining. So the folks that you see listed here volunteered to do so. So Christina and I are still on, and Monica acts as our staff liaison. But Helen and Lucretia let us know due to their availability, they are no longer available to serve on this subcommittee. So would love if anybody else would be interested in joining Monica, Christina, and I as we move forward with this effort. Please let us know, because we certainly are going to need some help with the development of this plan. And Monica educated me on what we're doing here. It's really just doing some initial assessments, initial reach outs, but bringing it back here to the board to really get your feedback. Are we headed the right way? Are we, when we talk about these short terms, and we also have a slide that shares a long-term plan, I would love your feedback if these are good starting points to help us mature with this effort. So let me start here with the short term. A lot of this, I think, is going to be really helpful with partnering and understanding what's going on from a cultural perspective. And let me use all these great events that are happening over the summer, like the Pride event. June is focused on LGBTQ plus Pride. So we're trying to align ourselves with other organizations that'll help us better be involved across the community, but have a focus point, right? We have to start somewhere. So if we understand that there's a focus going on any specific month, how do we connect to that specific population here in the city of Issaquah so we as a board member can be better educated and more involved? And sticking to that one with the June Pride event, Monica and I are in communication with some folks. We started with contacts in Seattle, but we're going to try to do is, well, I know we have it on the calendar, and perhaps Monica can comment, that we're going to have some speakers that can help us talk about Pride with history, but also have just a dialogue. So it's going to be an opportunity to both educate, but open up to a panel discussion later this month. So, Monica, you want to comment on that? I don't know how firm that date is. I think it's pretty firm, but that's just one of the short-term plans that we have.
Sure. Yes. Thank you very much, Ray. So definitely we are working on organizing a virtual Pride event. As Ray mentioned, we are hoping for now to have it on June 23rd. I think we have a pretty firm date around that at 6:30. And we are going to share more information with you at the end of this week and early next week. But we are excited, and Ray, I'm just so grateful to be working with you. I know you've been instrumental in gathering this group and laying a good foundation for what will be hopefully a great event. I have no doubt.
Yeah, thank you. And sticking to the subject, when I talk about focus points, I'm going to put something in the chat because this is a great reference for folks. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's actually communities that are targeted based on the date. So maybe perhaps we can use this calendar that I put in as, do these populations exist here in the city of Issaquah that we can make them a focal point for some of our outreach? So just a reference point that you can look at. I thought that was a great tool that I put in the chat. Continuing on with the short-term efforts, so outreach and collaboration opportunities, again, keep this in mind, these are just recommendations. Greater Issaquah community and engagement groups, the Right to Breathe, faith-based organizations, how do we partner with them and just knock on their door and say, hey, do you have an existing equity plan that we as an equity board could be better educated on, and perhaps there's an opportunity to collaborate. The large businesses, I think I mentioned this a couple months ago when I mentioned partnering with these very large organizations such as Costco. You know, one of the largest organizations in the country, maybe even the world, is right across the highway from us on Costco. So I would assume that they, because they decided to make Issaquah their home base, that they would be outreaching to the community to say, how do we work with you to really build an equity strategy? So I have an email out to them to see if they're willing to sit down at the table with us. Swedish Medical Center up the hill, hospital organizations are very keen on building diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And the speaker that we had last week, Shannon Kelly Ray, she actually worked for Providence, and I don't know if you're aware, but Swedish is part of Providence, and she led the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Division of Providence Health Services, which Swedish reports to. So I have an email out to her because I missed last week's meeting to say, if you have a contact at Issaquah Swedish Medical Center, let's sit down and chat. We already got feedback from PCC Market. I got in contact with some of their leadership to see how we sit down with them. REI is another recommendation. Again, if there's anything that sticks out in your mind, let's talk through them and see how we can collaborate. Let's not forget that third bullet, right? We're not focused on specifically large organizations, but let's ensure that we're also making connection with small businesses, those ones that are family owned. Most likely they're going to be owned by foreigners who just are trying to get themselves established. So really, if you have a connection with a small business that might help us form a strategy around community engagement, I'd love to hear about that. Public events, we were chatting about this. How do we broadcast this effort broadly? Well, why not set a booth up at the farmers market and say, we as an equity board would really like to outreach to the community. Do you guys have any ideas that you can share with us? Maybe just setting up a table there. Schools, you know, Megan and Jacob, I would pretty confident to say that there's probably a lot of focus around how the school engages from an equity perspective. So we'd love to chat with you about it and align our efforts there too. So lots of opportunities here. If there's events that are going on, let's not limit ourselves to the city of Issaquah, but if there's events going on outside of our city that we can use as a launching point or as a means of educating ourselves and how do we better connect with the community, I think we're open to that too. So those are what we mean by short term, at least for now. So before I jump to the long term, any questions, comments about bullets on this slide? Okay, next slide, please. So when we talk about long-term strategy, I would love your thoughts on this. I think developing a long-term strategy really requires us to be better educated, and what a great way to do that with the presentations that we had prior to mine, right? We need to understand what the city is doing from a specific strategy perspective, whether it be the ICAP that Stacy shared or the ADA strategy that was shared previously. Monica educated me that there's going to be more of those, so let's always put an equity lens on it. And then not only equity, but how do we, along with those other committees, reach out to the community? Let's make sure our board is somehow is informed and is involved in the process when they start to do outreach to the community, getting feedback on any ADA strategies. They had asked earlier if some of our board members could listen in on some of that. I would assume they'd want feedback from us based on groups or organizations they outreach to mature the ADA strategy plan. Nurture existing partnerships. I think when we hear from these presenters that Monica has teed up, we could nurture them so they are working with us from an equity lens on how they develop their strategies going into 2022. And I think I touched on that, creating new partnerships. I think that's just going to require boots on the ground. That's where we need the help. We need to make those phone calls. We need to walk up to some doors and just say, hey, is there challenges that you're having with the business that exists here in Issaquah that we might be able to be better educated on, and how can we partner with you to address those challenges with an equity lens? So a lot of that is boots on the ground and foundational work. So, questions about this long-term strategy? Monica, I don't know if there was a last slide here. I can touch on it if any, but I believe that was it. Yep, I think that was it.
Well, Ray, I did have a question.
Yeah.
I really love the idea of having boots on the ground and people getting involved with the community. So, and by the way, your presentation was awesome. But I do have concerns about how people react when you come to their door. And I'm also aware of I guess some specific documentation that you have to be able to go door to door. So I'm wondering if that's been brought up in any of the subcommittee meetings.
It is not, but that's a great call out. I think once we just initiate the phone conversation, maybe that's an initial task instead of just walking door to door. When I was thinking door to door, I was thinking of the small businesses. So I don't think they're more formalized in that process, but certainly we can learn from the dialogue that we have and the relationships that we develop with the larger ones. I have no doubt that there's things that are going to come up like that, Shay, that we have to check the legal box, right, to make sure we're following the right process. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I am going to go ahead and volunteer myself to help with the subcommittee. So that way
Awesome.
we can make sure we have seats filled and we can have bodies to help.
Thank you. Fantastic.
And Preeti has a question.
Yeah, great presentation, Ray. My question is, so, I'm seeing the purpose of the subcommittee is to increase community engagement around
Mhm.
equity. And I guess in my mind, I'm struggling a bit just because it's such a broad thing. So is it, and I always find, it's helpful when we have conversations with people that have a bit of a focus in mind. So like if I'm just trying to think about how best to refine that. Is it like a longer term equity strategy for the city? Like, I feel like it just
Yeah.
needs a little bit more
Oh,
focus there to help,
yeah.
but it's just a
Yeah.
suggestion. Yeah.
No.
Or
That's a great suggestion. I think we just started with a blank sheet of paper on Pretty and just started throwing things at it from short term and long term. And the ones that popped out to me, just because of their broad reach, were those large organizations just in the city of Issaquah. That's why I was mentioning PCC, Costco, and Swedish Medical Center. But the fine print needs to also be part of that, right? How do we get into the detail? That's why I really loved Stacy's presentation earlier. When we talk about community engagement, it really needs to be foundational. And it needs to start with us. So I was happy when Monica said, I think the strategy is going to be hard to create unless we as an equity board are further educated on what's going around in the city. So having somebody like Stacy talk about this community engagement throughput, I mean, I'm looking at her slide right now from earlier and saying, God, she did the work for me. She said, engage with the city staff, create workshop and meetings, create a public survey so it's not a limited group. And I would lean to Monica for guidance on how that occurs. Does it occur online? Does it occur as a mailer? How do we reach the broader community? Create focus groups based on those data, the data that we receive. So I'm going to start with that, and I would love, and we're going to continue to vet that with this group to see the kind of progress that we make. But I think following that template really resonated with me.
so this work just so it feels like it's how to create activate a community network that we can
Yes.
put to use once we have like a focused question or something.
Yeah. My goal
Okay,
is if
that's
once we
helpful.
create once we create that network, they are our eyes and ears out there. They're the ones, the
Yep.
small businesses, the schools, the large organizations, all of them together. If we have a point of contact with those subsets, then my thought is that's how we engage there. And surveys and things like that have a broader audience, but at least we have some foundation of how we're interacting with the community.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think Lucretia has a comment.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to the comment I made earlier during Stacy's presentation about the importance of having some sort of equity board landing page where people can come to us and say, hey, here's who we are, here's what we do. We're a nonprofit, we're an informal ad hoc group, whatever it is that they are, so that we have that communication tool available to the community. Because right now, I mean, I know who I know and what I know, but I have no idea who Ray knows, nor who, anybody else on this board knows. I think that would be a good place to start, is inviting the communication from the community into a repository that can then also be available to the community.
Great idea. I like the comment about who Ray knows and who others know. I mean, if any of us are in regular visitors to a business that we think that is owned by a minority group, talk to them next time you're there. Say what's going on from an equity lens. Have that discussion with the restaurant owner or the small business owner and introduce yourself. Boots on the ground.
I love that. And Lucretia must have sparked a lot of comments and questions because we have Monica, Megan, and Kelly.
And board members, I'm a staff liaison. I'm happy to go at the end. I was just gonna commend you, and yeah, so I'm gonna go at the end. Okay, thank you.
Looks like Megan.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of like a suggestion. It just kind of came to mind. Well, when I was thinking about how can we, get out to other community members, and get them really engaged, I think another tool we could really be using is social media. I mean, that might just be me being a young person since I'm always on Instagram and Twitter. Like, I think it's such a great place. If we want to put surveys out, we can post it there. If we can promote what we're doing as a board to really activate people. So that may be another role another person can do on that committee, as being kind of like a media coordinator and kind of creating that content and that kind of buzz.
Great idea. Yeah, thank you.
And Kelly, are you ready?
Oops, you're on mute.
Sure.
Oh, there you go.
I think I'm hearing everybody say that what we're doing in this committee is building relationships with other organizations and individuals who influence our community in some way or another, with a focus on racial equity, and that we build that network with intention to collaborate. For example, a campaign. I've done many, many, many campaigns. And so I would like to join the committee because it sounds very interesting to me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelly.
Mhm.
Thank you, board members. And I think that's such a good, exactly what you said, Kelly. I think, and all of you earlier, I think being able to connect with the community and staying in touch with the community, it's going to give you not only the information of what's working in our community, but also what needs addressing, right? You're going to hear from the communities directly of what's not working, where are people still hurting, and so then you're going to be so informed, and you're going to be able to make better recommendations for city council to consider, right? So that's why I really want to commend you, because while you are all representing the community, I so appreciate the fact that you don't want to just stay singular into just your feedback and your expertise, but you really want to continue to reach out to the rest of the community and stay in touch with them. So for that, I thank you. And with that, I'm going to make a small, tiny comment regarding subcommittee committee. And this is my fault, because when we started the conversation about creating a committee, an engagement committee, I kept using the word subcommittee. I used it over and over and over again until somebody at the city clerks on the city clerks team told me, Monica, it's actually a committee. You have the equity board and you're creating a committee. But I think I used it so often that now I just realized that everybody else is using subcommittee. So it's actually a committee. So my apologies, and thank you for allowing me that clarification for what it's worth, right? Whether it's committee, subcommittee, but so thank you for that.
And thank you for giving us that information, Monica.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ray, did you have something?
One last comment to Shay and to Kelly. So I will work with you to get another date on the calendar so we can meet as a committee to talk about next steps and see where we landed. So look out for that, and I'll send you an email for the 5 of us.
Could I also be included in that? I would love.
I would love that. I would love your
Cool.
perspective. That would be fantastic, Megan. I'll make sure you're on there.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, it looks like Lucretia has she has a comment as well.
Actually, I'm asking for clarification, Monica. When I attended the committee for outreach, I remember, or correct me if I don't remember this correctly, but you had asked the committee to wait to do any sort of outreach because we needed approval from the board before doing that. And so I need clarification as to when can I put on my equity board member hat when I'm out in the community, and when does it not go on? You know, I mean, it's just not clear to me how and when and what the protocols are.
And thank you, Lucrecia, for that. That's such a great question. I'm gonna try to answer the question, but I want to also ask permission to ask for further clarification from the city clerks, because so my understanding is we are an advisory board to the mayor and city council, right? We cannot take decisions, whether we are in the committee or as a board. We cannot take decisions on behalf of the city. So if we have, let's say, if we want to propose a policy, we would need to propose it, make the recommendation to mayor and city council. To that extent, though, our role is to engage with the community. So I see that reaching out to the community for engagement, to invite, let's say we reach out to someone and we invite them to the equity board. Hey, we would like to hear from you. We would like to learn from you. I think that that is appropriate because we don't take a decision on behalf of the city. We just reach out to a community group to invite them to educate us, right? And we are going to use that education and the information to make a recommendation to the mayor and city council. That's how I see the distinction. And I hope that helps a little bit answer your question. But I also feel like I would like to ask for further clarity from city clerks in case I'm missing something. Does that help, Lucrecia?
A lot, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Shay, I know it's 8 o'clock and board members, are we okay with moving to the last agenda item? I foresee that it's gonna take definitely less than 10 minutes and I'm hoping it's gonna be about 5 minutes. Is that okay?
I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you very much. And such a great meeting tonight. I'm just, that's actually one of my questions. But so before under staff report, I have a couple of informational items for you and then a couple of questions for you, board members. So I'm going to start first with some updates. Ray started earlier tonight with sharing a little bit about the work that we've been doing together around organizing a Pride Month event in June 23rd. More information to come at the end of this week and early next week. Related to that, also in June, we are working with a few of you, and I know Shay has been instrumental in that, and Tony, we are working on organizing an event for Juneteenth. That is scheduled to be an in-person event and also looking into hybrid option as well for that. And it is right now scheduled for June 20th, which is Monday at 5 p.m. More information to come on that. I'm very excited about both events. I think they're going to be very solid educational events for the community. We'll send you more information via email, and also communication will go out through our citywide newsletter. Very, very, very excited about both events. Just blown away, and thank you, board members, for helping with those. The next staff update, it's a briefly human services related update. I heard from some of you in individual conversations that there's an interest as there's an interest more broadly to learn about each different city departments. I think in particular there was an interest expressed regarding the human services division in our city. So I will look for an opportunity in the upcoming months, depending on the guests that we have, to also offer a more in-depth presentation regarding the human services initiatives and our department. But meanwhile, I just wanted to provide a 2-minute update regarding one of our programs. You may or may not know, last year, our city increased the human services roles within the city. One of the programs that we launched last year was a behavioral health and homeless outreach program. It is a combination of 2 distinct programs. The behavioral health program focuses on working with our police department in responding to behavioral health crisis that the city receives through 911. We work in supporting the police department who refers certain cases to us. And then we also initiated a homeless outreach program in which we intentionally started reaching out to the homeless community in Issaquah, learning more about the face of homelessness in our community, and trying to really better understand how to support those who are homeless and connect them to services. So part of that program, last year we hired our first staff. His name is Amir Shabana. And also recently we launched a dashboard for which I'm happy to provide you the link if you don't have that information. That tracks some of the data and information that we've been able to gather based on that outreach. More recently, we hired a second staff, second behavioral health coordinator. Her name is Kaylin Wood, and she's with us tonight. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce to you. And by hiring the second behavioral health coordinator, our intent is to provide a 7-day coverage for our services. So until now, we were limited to providing 5-day service. With having 2 staff, we'll have 7-day coverage for 10 hours a week to provide support not only to our homeless folks in Issaquah, but also to our police department through the behavioral health program. So with that, I'm going to pause. Kaylin, welcome. If you would like to introduce yourself.
Hi all, I'm Kaylin Wood, and I'm the newest member of the Human Services Department. Thank you for having me, and thank you for such a robust conversation tonight. It's really nice to see how engaged you all are, and your very thoughtful questions. So look forward to being more part of this side of city planning, as well as taking my experience from working through doing direct service with clients. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kaylin, and welcome. And so, board members, I will make sure to follow up with you so you have a link to our homeless outreach dashboard. The dashboard provides information not only on how many people we interacted with and what kind of service needs they had, but it also provides information regarding the service gaps that exist in our community and the lack of services often that exist. And with that, we hope that that gave us information to come back to our city administration and to city council to propose services and additional services to effectively respond to homelessness. So for those of you interested more in that, who have more interest in that, again, we would love to come back with a more in-depth presentation regarding our work. But also I wanted to say that there's an opportunity on June 22nd. If anyone is interested, our Human Services Division will present the Safety Services and Parks Committee, the City Council Committee. We will have quite a few presentations that touch on services for homeless, human services grants, the larger human services strategic plan, as well as services and options for landlords and tenants in the city. Again, I would be happy to provide more information on that. And so that concludes my reports for tonight. And then my 2 quick questions for you to end the meeting tonight are, as we dive into learning more about the different departments within the city and community groups in our city and regionally, what are your initial thoughts? What the type of presentations that you had tonight, was that helpful? Should we continue on this path with inviting at least 2 presentations per night we will have? Is this working? It seems like I see head nods, yes, or yes, head nods, yes. Okay, so that's working. Please let's continue the conversation on what and what's not working. Also, in terms of my second question, we actually addressed the subcommittee. It seems like we have a couple of board members interested in serving on the committee. So thank you for that. Oh, my next question was regarding next steps. Lucrecia and also some other board members in previous months, you made great suggestions about the equity board landing page. I would like to follow up with an email to send you the link to our existing page and would love to hear suggestions from you. I know we had some conversations on what can we, there was also some suggestions at some point in not only providing an opportunity for others to engage or provide input, but also perhaps to show some of the work that we completed so far and perhaps work that's on the agenda upcoming. So there are some opportunities for us and would love to hear from you. I will follow up with an email and I will ask you, I guess, if you don't mind, just respond and give me your suggestions so we can move forward with those. And also, I guess, then the last question kind of regarding is, I would need to follow up with our presenters. So I'm going to ask you if anyone is interested in participating or if you know anyone who may be interested in participating in the ADA work group from our presentation earlier tonight. So just be on the lookout for an email with follow-ups on that end. And thank you so much. Great. A lot of work. I think that's it.
Oh, I think Christina has a comment.
Hola. Estaba viendo la página de la ciudad y veo que ahí hay una sección donde dice Major Projects. En esa sección deben de estar todos los proyectos en los que se está trabajando por los diferentes departamentos, ¿cierto?
So I was looking at the webpage and there's a section that says major projects. I'm assuming that all of the major projects from the different departments that the city is working on at this time should be listed there. Is that correct?
Incluyendo los que nos dijeron esta noche los departamentos que vinieron, ¿cierto?
And that also includes the ones that we were addressing tonight, correct?
It should, absolutely. I think these are major projects. I'm gonna try to check to see, but I would assume that yes, it includes all major projects, and I'm just looking at it right now. Yes, I believe that's correct, Christina.
Gracias.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would be happy to email that link as well to all of you in case you don't have it. And also as a connection, as you might have seen it tonight in the presentation, it's always all of the major projects connect to the strategic plan, right? So that's another great resource, Christina. Thank you.
Alrighty, do we have any other questions or comments for tonight? Then we are only 6 minutes over, but we are ready to adjourn. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Good evening, board members. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, and thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We always would love to hear from you on how can we.
Yep, indeed.
It was
Thank
a great
you.
presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Monica. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Kaylin. Have a good evening. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And Shay, as always, great job. You are becoming a pro at this. Stop putting yourself down.
Yeah, I had like a brain malfunction. Too many things going on today. It was a very long day. Anyhow, I'm glad we got through it. Great presentations tonight. Really good stuff. So I'm so excited about what's going on or what's coming in the future.
Right. Yeah, that's why I think it's great presentations. I think more and more as we hear from more departments, I think we are gonna get additional ideas, and at some point I think the pieces of the puzzle will come together. But I think we've been doing with a lot of new stuff and not knowing where to start, and yeah, just a lot of new stuff. But again, I think it's so seamless. Your facilitation, it's just better and better all the time. So don't. It's okay. I completely forgot about like initial like reminding people to speak slowly and whatnot. Oh well.
Yeah, and I happened to look at the interpreters and I was like, ah, forgot to say that. But I was also a little flustered because I jumped into the meeting late and I was just like, oh, geez, let me just get in here and get started so we can all get everybody out on time. So I appreciate you being so understanding and the group being so understanding. And then of course, we'll continue to work through it. And I think that I want to, I know on the next meeting, I really want to encourage everyone to not think in terms of perfection, but think in terms of good enough, because we do have to start. So we don't want to delay our processes by overthinking things. But outside of that, I think we're going to be good.
Yeah, and I think I also noticed that now more and more members are feeling comfortable about speaking up, and I think next will be like those who don't feel so comfortable speaking up, just encouraging them, right? Because I think it's also yeah, I think sometimes I think that people don't feel comfortable asking questions or commenting, so they hear the presentation and they're afraid of saying something wrong. So like you said, maybe just reminding them it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't be shy, don't be afraid. And actually I wanted to say that, I just forgot. Don't be afraid, don't be shy in asking the questions and the tough questions, and right.
Absolutely. And I think Kelly jumped right in. So I think she's a perfect example of how to do that. So hopefully we can get the rest of the board members. And there's not very many that are quiet, but I definitely want to hear from other board members more often. So I think that that's going to be kind of key.